Okay, welcome. Today I'm going to be focusing on a relatively short topic, and that is how do you make your property inspection a successful one? Today I'll focus on three things that you need to make inspection, your property inspection, a success. These are prerequisites, what I consider to be um, simple yet significant things that can be done to make your inspection a successful one. The first, this will, this is so simple um, that the initial reaction you might have will be, oh, I already knew that. The first is to choose the right time and the right day. Choose, choose the right time and the right day. Now, let me explain or expand on this very briefly. It is not always possible to know the precise weather conditions in advance of a viewing, except usually at specific periods of the year and in specific locations. I guess I should have started by saying that I am referring to um, viewings in Great Britain, specifically viewings in England. We have a peculiar um, climate condition in the UK, and the weather changes depending on where you are. The weather changes. So, for example, if you live in Scotland, when I lived in Scotland, I noticed that in one day you can have four different weather conditions. You can start the day and it's freezing cold, then it begins to rain, then the sun comes out, then it gets cloudy. So it's difficult if you're viewing a property in Scotland to know in advance what the exact weather condition will be. So, um, but if you're in England, the temperatures, the weather conditions, the climate conditions are slightly more stable. Um, and so this first recommendation is something that I have learned from experience. Now, I like to carry out my inspections on rainy or overcast days rather than sunny and bright days. And preferably, if I can, I also want to carry out my viewings at the weekends or on weekdays after 4:30 p.m. Now, let me stop and just let that sink in, um, because I know it will go against what most people have been told. Perhaps it might even go against what you have been told. The natural position that most people would take would be that they would prefer to carry out the viewing during the day, or they would like to carry out the viewing when it's sunny. From my experience, I beg to differ. My preference, like I said, is to carry out my inspections, property inspections, on rainy or overcast days rather than sunny and bright days, and preferably at the weekends or during the week after 4:30 p.m. One of the reasons for this is viewing at the weekends or after 4:30 is I like to get a feel for the street, the building, when other occupants of the street or other occupants of the building, and when other homes on the street are likely to be occupied, rather than during the weekday um, when people are at work. So if you do a viewing when people are working or people are in school, generally most streets tend to be very quiet. That can be slightly misleading. So just keep in mind, now there is an exception that I usually apply to this viewing preference. And that is if the property in question is within close proximity to a school, an outdoor sports or social arena, or a pub, in which case my viewing time is usually adapted to the peak times of the outdoor space. Now let me explain what this means. Let's assume that you're viewing a property and the property is next to a pub. So let's say you found the house and it's a lovely house that you intend to buy. And further down the street, maybe there is this lovely local pub. And the local pub has an outdoor arena. Or maybe it's a school with an external playground where kids can play. One of the things you have to make sure that you take into account is noise, people traffic, pollution, sometimes even antisocial behavior. And therefore, if I'm viewing a property that I have found, remember I said in one of the earlier sessions that you have to carry out a bird's eye view, a satellite view of the location, and that will give you an idea of the infrastructure you have in close proximity, or the buildings you have in close proximity to the property you have in mind. If the property has within its nearest boundaries some social venue, whether that be a pub, whether that be an outdoor sports arena, whether that be a hall or something similar, I would then change my viewing so that it coincides with what I consider to be the peak time for that particular arena. So if it's a pub, I like to go when I think the pub is likely to be the most occupied. If it's a school, I like to go when I believe the school would be maybe during their lunch break, when everyone is out playing. Now you can gather so much additional information about demographics, local residents, and their behaviors if you schedule your viewing at the right time. Now, property inspections or viewing properties there is no one. I should say this because sometimes, depending on where you are, you probably know much more about the local area than I do. Whether that is a location in Great Britain or somewhere outside of Great Britain. So don't take my recommendations to heart as the ultimate rule. I'm explaining how I do my viewings, and all I'm saying is that I have found from my experience that whenever I view a property at the right time, on the right day, and under the right climate conditions, I tend to find that I get the best information. Now let me go back a little bit and just talk about something I mentioned earlier on. Viewing a property at the times and climate conditions that I've referred to will help. It helps, in my experience, it helps you observe the following. If you view a property during overcast days, it would give you an indication as to how much daylight you have in the property. So the first thing you would understand is daylight levels. Understand daylight levels. Now you might be thinking, well, if you really want to ascertain how much daylight comes into a property, then why wouldn't you do it during sunny days? Not to worry, I will explain, even if not in this session, in the subsequent sessions, I'll go into detail. But the key thing is if you view a property during a period when it's overcast, you glean much more information about the property than when it's sunny. So viewing a property during the times that I've referred to, or the climate conditions that I've referred to, will give you an indication of daylight levels, noise levels, vehicular, and pedestrians or pedestrian traffic levels. And in addition to traffic levels, also traffic patterns. Traffic patterns. In addition to this, if it's a building that you're buying and if it's a leasehold building, and there are other buildings or units in the same building, you would find that it will give you an indication about how much traffic you find in the hallway, on the stairs, in the communal area, in the shared public spaces. Noise usually travels to and from a property. A good way to understand the integrity of the building envelope is to inspect the property when the building is being exposed to the typical levels of external pressures that most buildings are exposed to, especially those in inner cities. Now, although it's not possible to visually observe the building envelope and its fixtures in its best light during overcast periods, you can still gain so much information. So for example, irrespective of the weather conditions, you can visually observe any building envelope and you can visually observe its fixtures at any time. The roof can be inspected. The associated rainwater fixtures can be inspected. But my experience has been, if you were to think about the fact that if this is a house, you have what we call the external envelope, which is the roof and the structure. Another thing you have an idea about is you have what we call fixtures and fittings. So the external services, which is usually the rainwater pipes that collect all the water. So this building is exposed to the elements, rain and sun. What you're trying to do when you view a property is to understand the condition of the envelope. One way to understand the condition of the envelope is to recognize that in every location, there is a consistency in weather patterns. One thing that affects the integrity of a building is water, not sunlight. The more water, in terms of rainwater intensity or rainwater fall in a location, the more concerned you should be about the integrity of the envelope. One of the reasons I prefer rainy and overcast days is it would enable me see in real time whether the rainwater fixtures work properly. It would help me observe and see whether the roof is collecting all the water and actually draining all the water down to the nearest surface water drain. It would enable me see whether there are any overflows, whether water is just falling down, and actually would enable me see the level of what we call surface water integrity in the pavements. So there are sometimes you might find that the floor or the soil is uneven, and so you have ponds, you have ponding. If it's raining when you're doing your inspection, you can see everything, and that way you can make allowances for the possibility that some additional expenses will need to be incurred in the future to rectify any defects. So keep that in mind. Now, bright, dry, sunny days are, in my opinion, the worst days for viewing a property. And the reason is simply because they show the property in its best climate. If it's beautiful and it's sunny and it's bright, you don't get to see all the defects. So I prefer to view properties in weather conditions that are similar to the average climate in that particular location. So if it's in Scotland, I want it to be windy and I want it to be rainy. If it's in Wales, I want it to be windy, I want it to be rainy. If it's in England, I want it to be windy. Well, England doesn't have that much wind, but I want it to be rainy and overcast, preferably for all three. I will admit that brighter days are better for detailed structural observations. So if it's a building that is, brick, you can observe the integrity of the brick. You can observe the integrity of the various decorations on the property. You can observe whether some level of cleaning is needed. You can observe as to whether the building needs to be repointed or whether some level of tuck pointing is needed. So yes, I do agree that bright days reveal more. But I think that the advantage of viewing during overcast or rainy days far exceeds viewing during dry and bright days. Now, always keep in mind that your role when you view a building or when you inspect a property, your role is to identify problems, to identify potential problems or issues that could lead to buyer's remorse in the future. So I said your role is to identify problems. That's the first. When you inspect a property, your role is to identify problems. The second role is to identify potential problems that could occur sometime in the future. And one of the reasons you're trying to do this is so that you can make the best decision about the property. If the building meets all of the stringent inspection conditions that I've just stated, which would occur in poor weather conditions, then the building will do just fine in the best of weather climates and best of weather conditions. But here is the most important thing. The opposite is seldom true. In other words, during rainy seasons and overcast seasons, if the building meets all of your requirements, noise, sunlight, daylight, traffic flow, pollution, integrity of the envelope, if all of that is met during overcast and rainy days, then it should do just fine during sunny days. But on the other hand, if the building meets all of your conditions during sunny days, there is no guarantee that during the rainy seasons and during the overcast seasons that it will meet all of your conditions. So that's one item to keep in mind. Choose the right time of the day and choose the right day. Now the second, this would be fairly straightforward. Dress for the occasion. Sounds simple. Again, you would say, well, that's common sense. But remember, common sense is not that common, especially in today's society. It's not unusual for property viewings to be scheduled before or just after work hours. So most times, most people would schedule their viewings just before they go into work or after work. As such, what you tend to find is that most people who view properties usually, as you would imagine, if it's done before work, they come in a formal work outfit. Or if it's after work, they come wearing a formal work outfit. Now, there is nothing wrong with wearing formal wear. My preference is to always ensure that I'm wearing clothes that do not restrict my ability to explore the property in detail. That I wear clothes that do not restrict my ability to do things whilst I'm inspecting. So for example, you're viewing a property and you've dressed really nicely for work and you've decided to do the viewing just before you go into work. You arrive and it's raining, but you haven't come with an umbrella. The idea of standing outside, if you go back to what I said in the previous session, that you need to spend 30 minutes on the outside, the idea of standing outside under the rain with or without an umbrella or with or without a raincoat is not something most people welcome. For one reason, you're nicely dressed. You're dressed for the office. And there's a possibility that if you arrive and it's raining, you quickly go into the place, into the property. You probably spend, let's say I give this to you, you spend 30 minutes on the inside. But you don't spend, let's say you spend 5 minutes on the outside. That is not enough, for the reason being, and I think I'm jumping a step here because I would like to wait until the subsequent sessions to explain this. The value of a property is split into two parts. Let's say you find a property and it's a house. It's a 4-bedroom house. It's on the market for £550,000. The value of that property is split into what I call the interior and the exterior value ratio. The interior and exterior. For a building that is a house, depending on the location, my experience is that most of the value, between 80 to 95% of the value, will be based on the exterior. By exterior, what I mean is the grounds, the structure, and the architecture. By ground, I'm also referring to the fact that you're dealing with, the postcode, the postal code, the location of the property. So location, ground, structure, architecture. The remaining 5%, sometimes it could extend to 20%, is on the interior. This has to do with the interior decor. So the most important value is the land. If you find a property that has a structure and grounds that have integrity, the building will pass the inspection test, even if the interior is dilapidated. On the other hand, if you find a building that has a beautiful interior but is structurally unsound, the building will not pass the structural inspection test. So always keep in mind that the real value of a property comes from the unit, the envelope, the structure itself, the grounds, and the location. Don't pay too much attention to the cosmetics of what is inside, the interior design and the decor. So more emphasis should be spent on the outside than the inside, which is why I said you have to dress appropriately for the viewing. Now, I prefer clothes that do not restrict my ability to explore the property in detail. Now, you should normally anticipate that you would need to pull up old carpets, floorboards. You might need to climb, into the loft. You might need to walk through an unkept garden. You might even need to go on your knees to make low-level observations. Or you might need to stand outside in the rain, like I mentioned earlier. And that could be for an extended period of time. You should always treat the viewing, the property inspection, as you would a work or a business related property inspection. So, treat it like a business. Don't treat it like a casual home viewing. Don't be passive in your approach. This advice applies irrespective of the type of property that you're looking to buy. And it also applies irrespective of the value of the property itself that you're looking to buy. Maybe I should leave you with one last advice before I move to the final. This was number 2, before I move to the final item. And the advice is this. Let it not be said, let me think about how to put this across. Just imagine one of the things, or one of the purpose of this series is to minimize buyer's remorse, to ensure that when you make a decision, you've considered everything possible. And I have seen occasions whereby people view a property, buy the property, and then they say, oh, do you know, I didn't notice this. So for example, I'll give you a good example. A friend of mine, when he purchased the property, he spent so much time inspecting the property. The property itself had a sauna, and it had all the spa type services within the building. Because he spent so much time and attention to detail opening up every single location, he was able to estimate how much it would cost to remove entirely all of the spa facilities. And therefore, he was able to adjust the price he paid because he didn't need some of the facilities that the previous owner had. So let it not be said in the future that your clothes were the reason for not observing a condition of a property, which would have been obvious to anyone not limited by their outfit. Now, I'll go back to this friend of mine. He was wearing jeans, a pair of jeans. He was dressed as though he was going, I guess, to the local market. Jeans and t-shirt. And he was able to just, climb into various parts of the building, pull up carpets, go into the loft, and he wasn't dressed in a suit. He wasn't dressed wearing very smart shoes. And so he was able to get his hands dirty. So keep that in mind. Now, the final one, number 3, again, very, very common, is to go with company. Go with company. I share this because if you are not an experienced building professional or an investor, an experienced investor, I would always recommend that you carry out your viewings with someone. And the person should be ideally someone who is not emotionally invested in the purchase like you are. The ideal company would be someone who is knowledgeable, maybe someone like an architect, an engineer, a surveyor, a contractor, a builder, or someone who who has the technical expertise, and they can accompany you. Now, if you do not know anyone with the technical experience, then you do have to go with someone that you trust. But my recommendation is that you inform them that they're going to be playing a role which is different to yours. Their role is to be what I call the devil's advocate. They should focus on identifying and documenting every observable or potential problem during the inspection. The idea here is, if you combine, just think about this, you have 2 people. One person is looking out for everything that is wrong. One person is looking out for everything that is potentially nice. This is you, because you're emotionally invested, and this is your company, and they are less emotionally invested. If you can combine all of their findings with all of your findings, and you bring them together, the positive and the negative observations, it begs to believe that you're more likely to make a better informed decision. Now, on the off chance that you are not able to find someone and you have to go alone, then just keep in mind everything you will be learning and all the recommendations that I will be providing in this series, and some of the recommendations that I have already provided in the book, Ins and Outs. I think the advice will keep you in good stead. Again, you do not have to make the decision during the inspection. Just go there, gather as much information as you can, take the information back, and then you could share the information with people you trust, and they can help you make the best decision for your purchase. I hope that was helpful.